Rome is sleeping, but not for long. Friday, September 10th, 1943. 2 days ago, the Kingdom of Italy surrendered to General Eisenhower. Mussolini was removed from power some time ago. Now he's imprisoned in Abruzzo, a mountainous region east of Rome. The King of Italy has fled south, under the protection of the Anglo-American army. The new Italian government is paralyzed, and the Nazis enter Rome as conquerors. Behind the Vatican walls, a man holds his breath. Eugenio Pacelli, Pope Pius XII. He sits in his library, the windows sealed shut. He knows they could come for him at any moment. The rumor has been spreading for days. The Nazis are going to kidnap the Pope. Some swear that Hitler has already given the order. Take him to Germany, for his protection, they say. But Joseph Goebbels, the powerful minister of propaganda of the Third Reich, is more honest in his diary. The Führer is livid. He wants to punish treacherous Italy for surrendering to the Allies. And the Vatican, he believes, is behind this whole business, a nest of conspiracies and parallel diplomacy that made Mussolini's downfall possible. A full month earlier, on August 4, 1943, Monsignor Montini, the future Pope Paul VI, had alerted the Vatican gendarmerie, the Pope's tiny army, to prepare a surreal defense. He had ordered that, in the event of a Nazi invasion of the Vatican City, no one was to open fire. Only passive resistance, but vigorous. The Pope's unfortunate soldiers had prepared themselves to repel the German invaders using fire hoses. Two days after the Nazi invasion of Rome, in an extraordinarily daring operation, a commando unit of German paratroopers frees Benito Mussolini from his prison on Mount Gran Sasso. Now the Duce is back on the loose. He's ready to establish a new state of his own in northern Italy, and to start a civil war. Three days after the Nazi invasion of Rome, a German patrol positions itself along the border of St. Peter's Square. The message is clear. We can come in whenever we want. Pacelli is just a few meters distant, line of sight. Like St. Joseph, he has stayed in the shadows until now. But in this moment, he risks ending up like John the Baptist, beheaded. In these harrowing moments, he places his trust in two men. The first is Enrico Pietro Galeazzi, architect of the Sacred Palaces, a man with wide-reaching connections, a bridge to the United States, and a master of diplomacy. It is Enrico who devises an escape plan for the Pope. His idea is to hide Pius XII in a villa he owns in San Felice Cerchio, then take him to Spain. Sister Pasqualina Lenert, Pacelli's loyal German aide, even inspects the villa. But in the end, the plan is abandoned. The second man the Pope trusts is his personal physician, his confidant, Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi, the brother of Enrico Pietro. To save himself, all Riccardo would have to do is cross a corridor, slip through a passageway, take one of the countless back routes that, in these dark days, open and close like living arteries. And yet, he stays. He remains inside the besieged Vatican, beside that pale, sleepless man he calls Eugenio when no one is listening, and Holy Father when others are near and distance is required. Insomnia, frequent urination, tachycardia. For each of Eugenio's ailments, Riccardo has an answer, a homeopathic remedy, a few drops, or simply a kind word, spoken at the right time, in the right tone. How does one live, knowing that just beyond the walls the Nazis are waiting to storm in, to take everything, to erase it all?
The Holy Father had one dream that recurred with troubling insistence.
Riccardo will write in his memoir.
He saw himself being pursued by a kind of monster. They always ended up forcing their way into his office.
What does courage look like when it is the only truly free choice you have left? And is it even courage, or merely the blind force of someone who cannot, will not, or dares not leave? Hard to say. But one thing is certain. Riccardo could flee, and he chooses not to. Meanwhile, increasingly precise reports are coming in from Berlin, and Hitler's order arrives as well. The Führer has spoken. The Pope must be transferred to the north, to Munich or to Liechtenstein. The Vatican's archives must be taken as well, its artworks, everything of value it holds. The order comes directly from Hitler and is received by Karl Otto Wolff, Supreme Commander of the German police in Italy, a man who knows the exact weight of the Führer's words. When the order arrives, Wolff raises no objections. He does not stall. He asks no questions. He doesn't need to. He knows exactly what must be done, when to do it, and how. And above all, he knows that the man who gave the order does not tolerate hesitation.
Jawohl, mein Führer.
But then, he disobeys. He makes sure someone warns Pacelli and assures him that,
on the German side, no danger will threaten his person or the Curia, as long as I hold the position of Supreme Commander of the SS and the police in Italy, because under no circumstances will I dishonor my name with the political and historical disgrace of a deportation of the Pope.
This is how he would testify many years later, under oath, during the beatification trial of Pius XII at the Archdiocesan Tribunal of Munich. There is something in Rome these days that escapes logic. In 1943, an order from the Führer is an order from the Führer. The Nazis carry it out without hesitation, without interpretation. Anyone who refuses signs their own death sentence. And orders far more inhuman than the one to take into custody Eugenio Pacelli have been executed for years, with ruthless precision. But in Rome, General Karl Otto Wolff doesn't give a damn. For that ancient idea, still alive, still powerful, that to lay hands on the Pope means crossing an irreparable line, or maybe an agreement was reached. Whatever the case, Hitler's order vanishes like a bullet that crumbles before it hits. And Pius XII remains where he is, still, invisible, untouchable. But during the months of the Nazi occupation, the people of Rome are pushed to their limits. Hunger, raids, deportations. No shots are fired in the Vatican, but negotiations take place. Cardinals, ambassadors, gendarmes, they search for a compromise to avoid total destruction. And Riccardo is there, always by Eugenio's side. He listens, he observes. When, in 1944, Allied troops take Rome, the Nazis leave in silence. Head held high, but in an orderly fashion. And the Anglo-Americans enter the city without firing a single shot. Elsewhere, everything burns, everyone is killed. Berlin becomes a heap of rubble. Paris is liberated only after days of bloodshed. Japan sees 2 cities vaporized by nuclear fire in a matter of seconds. And in Italy too, many cities are disfigured, bombed without mercy. But not Rome. It is the only capital occupied by the Nazis that is not destroyed. The only one liberated without resistance. As if all the natural and supernatural forces of the ancient city had come together to draw an invisible line, one that no one dares to cross. From the moment of the liberation from the Nazis, Pius XII acquires, in the imagination of the Roman people, an almost legendary aura. Defensor Civitatis, they call him, the defender of the city, at a time when every other authority had abandoned it.
This is London calling. Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced Hitler is dead. I repeat that. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead.
The war is over. Mussolini has been executed like a thief, hanged upside down in a square of Milan. Hitler shot himself in the head in a bunker, after poisoning the dog first, then his wife. Italy, Germany, and Japan lie in ruins. But the Catholic Church has not collapsed. It is a miracle. Pacelli truly believes that. And so, like every survivor, he feels he has a task. Pacelli wants to rebuild Italy. He is convinced that the downfall of fascism has opened a higher path. A unique opportunity to build a Catholic civilization. Integral. Total. A theocracy in all but name. Without Mussolini, but with a pervasive idea. To Christianize every aspect of life. Politics, education, the press, sport, cinema, medicine, everything. A spiritual totalitarianism. Without the truncheon, but with incense. And in this grand vision, imperial in its own way, Eugenio does not forget. He does not forget those who stood by him, those who did not run, those who took his pulse during the darkest days. And for that, he wants to thank Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi in the way he knows best, with an honor that speaks louder than 1,000 pats on the back. In December 1949, Dr. Professor Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi receives a nomination that takes one's breath away. Honorary member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. It is not a trinket. It is not a consolation prize. The Pontifical Academy is one of the most exclusive and influential scientific institutions in the world. Its members include figures like Alexander Fleming, the discoverer of penicillin, Niels Bohr, the man who developed the atomic model, and Erwin Schrödinger, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, the one with the cat both alive and dead inside the box. Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi takes a seat beside them, bearing the same title. It is an immense recognition, perhaps even excessive, some will say. But Eugenio has never been particularly balanced in judging his friend Riccardo. To him, that questionable but fiercely loyal man has always been more than an eye doctor. He is an undeniable genius, and a companion in war ready to die by his side. But even if the bombs no longer fall, the soldiers are silent, and the parishes begin to fill with children again. Something still breaks. Not in the streets, but inside a body, inside a mind, inside Eugenio Pacelli. The Pope begins to decline, slowly but with relentless consistency. Now that the emergency is past, and the new project of Catholic civilization weighs on his conscience, his body starts to give way. Riccardo, who examines him almost every day, is the first to notice. The retrosternal pain appears, then the tachycardia. The heart begins to tremble. Riccardo writes in his notebook,
Senile cardiovascular sclerosis.
But this is only the beginning. For Eugenio, the 1950s will be a long and tormented decline. More than once, and with growing frequency, he will appear ready to surrender his soul to God. Yet a fierce, almost cruel willpower will keep him on his feet, but at an ever greater cost. As Eugenio falls ill, Riccardo instead comes back to life. He is one of the few men who spent the war at the Pope's side and is still alive to tell the tale. For him, peace is a kind of redemption. By now, he's a legend. The press hails him. In the scientific community, everyone wants to be near him. His reputation has never been higher. And he enjoys it, greedily but with a light touch. Between a prostate to check and a conference to chair, between the latest investigations into the relics of St. Peter and medical consultations on the miracles of candidates for canonization, he even manages to slip in moments of refined, glamorous escape. It is August 1952, and Riccardo joins the jury of the Venice Film Festival, the oldest and most prestigious film festival in the world. He's not part of the main competition. Riccardo is on the jury for scientific and art documentaries, a step away from the limelight, but still under the chandeliers of the Hotel Excelsior on the Lido of Venice, where, incidentally, there is also a famous casino. In fact, Riccardo is gambling a lot during this period. In the post-war years, Life is a roulette wheel, and Riccardo faces it without fear. Even the Italian Ministry of the Interior gets wind of it. In the file kept by the Division of Confidential Affairs, they write,
"It appears that the archiator has a passion for gambling, and that he has repeatedly lost rather substantial sums in Monte Carlo."
The passion for gambling is a suction pump for money, even when you win. That's why Riccardo never has enough money, despite the income from his ophthalmology practice, his salary at the hospital, and his pay as pontifical archiator. He needs to come up with something, and he does, with great imagination. He strikes a deal with a young journalist, an American destined to become a major name. He is Paul Hoffman, a junior member of the Rome Bureau of the New York Times. Many years later, in his book, All Vatican, A Slightly Wicked View of the Holy See, Paul Hoffman will tell the whole story.
One of my tasks was a liaison with a Vatican informant who had been put on our payroll. The Vatican informant was Pius XII personal physician, Dr. Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi. For years, he called me by phone at irregular intervals to let us have news of the Pope's health and occasionally some Vatican gossip.
On the phone with Hoffman, Riccardo goes by the name Dick.
He was using the English abbreviation of his first name, he explained me confidentially, because the Vatican phones were being tapped by the papal police.
Paul and Riccardo, or rather Dick, have a code, ciphered vocabulary to quickly share sensitive updates on various Vatican matters. A private ritual known only to them.
We updated the covert telephone communication system every month when I went to his private office in Via Sistina to deliver his retainer fee in an envelope to him personally. We didn't know at the time that he was receiving more such envelopes from other clients.
Yes, young Paul Hoffman of the New York Times is not the only journalist who pays Riccardo for confidential information. There is also Giulio Bartoloni.
My father had good contacts with Galeazzi-Lisi, who, from time to time, informed him about the Pope's health.
The one speaking is Giulio Bartoloni's son, Bruno. A journalist like his father, he worked as a Vatican correspondent for Agence France-Presse for 4 to 5 years. A gracious man, who will play an important role in this story later on as well. My wife and I had the honor of meeting him on a lovely Saturday in May at his home. He is no longer with us.
Galeazzi-Lisi abitava in Corso Trieste.
Galeazzi-Lisi lived on Corso Trieste, in a small apartment building where Max Berger also lived.
Max Berger.
He was the Vatican correspondent for Agence France-Presse, and he was my boss at France-Presse.
Siccome Galeazzi-Lisi era un giocatore e c'era sempre bisogno di soldi,
since Galeazzi-Lisi was a gambler and was always in need of money, he would run into Max Berger.
Uno stipendio.
And Max Berger basically offered him a salary to inform us about the Pope's health.
Lui accettò, naturalmente.
He accepted, of course, and the agreement was that any news concerning the Pope's health, he would call my father.
E noi avevamo a casa,
and at home, we had a dedicated phone line for Giovanni.
Giovanni.
That was Galeazzi-Lisi's code name, let's say.
Let's recap. Riccardo was born Galeazzi. Then he became Galeazzi-Lisi. He was Muhammad when he raced cars, Dick to the journalists of the New York Times, and Giovanni to those at France-Presse.
Fatto sta che mio padre si incazzava come una belva ogni volta.
The fact is, my father would get mad as hell every time we used that phone, because there was always the risk that Galeazzi-Lisi would call and find the line busy. The black phone. It was in the bedroom. But really, the phone almost never rang, because if Galeazzi-Lisi needed to talk to my father, he'd find him in the Vatican press office.
Era un telefono che era praticamente muto.
So it was practically a silent phone. Galeazzi-Lisi didn't exactly call every day. The truth is, Galeazzi-Lisi was practically the shadow of Pius XII. For example, when Pius XII went for walks in the Vatican gardens, Galeazzi-Lisi would follow him.
And what did he need the salary from Giulio Bartoloni for?
He used to gamble, It's not like he hung around fancy clubs or elite circles, as far as I know.
Però insomma era un giocatore.
But still, he was a gambler. That eventually came out. There was no doubt about it.
At the time, was it known that Galeazzi-Lisi was corrupt?
Beh, sì, anche di Galeazzi si sapeva.
Well, yes. It was known about Galeazzi, too.
But if they knew, in the Vatican, why didn't they kick him out?
Perché no?
Because no. Because if Pius XII said he was fine with it, everyone shut up.
Tutti zitti.
Got it? Who was going to kick him out?
Era impressionante.
Pius XII was impressive. But it was a time when people were easily impressed. Pius XII was a kind of holy man. People would fall to their knees when he passed by on the ceremonial papal throne carried on shoulders.
Stava con la sedia gestatoria.
But why was that holy man fine with Riccardo just the way he was?
Perché era molto amico del fratello e suo da tanti anni.
Because he had been a close friend of both Riccardo and his brother for many years. So there was a matter of friendship, let's call it that. And Pacelli was very loyal in friendship, a great friend of the brother. In short, he was very loyal in friendship.
C'è dubbio.
No doubt about it.
But in the end, what does Bruno Bartoloni think of Riccardo, he who knew him?
Beh, perché era un ciarlatano.
He was a charlatan. He was an eye doctor treating the Pope. It seemed a bit much.
Young Paul Hoffman, at every secret meeting, always tried to extract just a little more information from Riccardo. A detail, a sentence, a whisper to attribute to a Vatican source.
Whenever I presented our envelope to Dr. Galeazzi-Lisi and tried to worm some extra bit of inside information out of him, I was amused that the mustached archiator maintained the same poker face he exhibited when, attired in black, he appeared in the Pope's retinue at some canonization or pontifical mass.
Always unflappable. Always the same iron mask.
I particularly remember one of our monthly meetings when I routinely asked Dr. Galeazzi-Lisi how he was, and he said,
"Just fine."
And then, pressed by me, he sneeringly gave me a few glimpses of what was going on in the papal apartment. The next day, I read in the newspapers that the pontifical physician's wife had died earlier that week, and that a quiet funeral had already taken place. The impenetrable doctor, so recently widowed, had given no sign of being shaken by his bereavement.
We know it. That poker face that amused Hoffman was much more than a pose. It was a mask carved into his flesh by 2 world wars. The first fought on the battlefield as a military doctor, among dismembered bodies and gas in the trenches of the Carso. The second endured at the side of a pope under siege, with the shadow of deportation knocking at the gates every night. It is the face of a man who broke inside, once and for all, and who perhaps can still feel a thrill only at the gambling table, as he bets money he doesn't have on some improbable combination. But maybe there was more to it. Sister Pascalina Lenert, the housekeeper, the administrator, the other shadow of Pius XII, would later testify in the beatification process of her beloved Eugenio.
The doctor's behavior had certainly been affected by a form of facial paralysis with cerebral repercussions, which had struck him about 6 years before the death of Pius XII.
So, around 1952. And this unfortunate facial paralysis greatly worries the caring Sister Pascalina.
I myself, at the invitation of the doctor's brother, architect Galeazzi, did not fail to point out to the Pope that perhaps the archiator was no longer able to hold that position. And the Holy Father replied to me,
"He has served me well for many years. Sending him away now that he is ill would be wrong. It would go against justice and Christian charity. If I sent him away now, he would be a ruined man, and his family would suffer greatly."
That is how Professor Galeazzi remained in his post.
Caring, loving Pascalina, a German nun, utterly strict, tempered like steel. She has watched over Eugenio with tireless devotion ever since he was apostolic nuncio in Munich, and from that moment on, she never left his side. She takes care of the meals, the household arrangements, the medicine, the daily schedule. Everything goes through her. Some, with malice and no real evidence, claim that she gives him orders rather than the other way around. There are those who swear she even interferes in political and pastoral decisions. They call her the godmother. They call her the popess.
Aveva un aspetto molto severo.
She had a very stern appearance.
Bartoloni recalls,
Praticamente,
I'm not saying you had to get down on your knees when you spoke to her, but almost. There's nothing you can do. She was Pacelli's mother, basically. She ran everything. She even managed the canaries.
gestiva pure I canarini.
Riccardo, what kind of relationship did he have with this formidable nun?
Io non credo che fossero veramente nemici, no.
I don't think they were truly enemies, no. Of course, Sister Pasqualina could be terrifying, because everyone knew she had direct contact with Pius XII.
Quindi poteva rivelare delle cose, capito?
So she could reveal things, you know?
Instead, Paul Hoffman writes in his book,
From my talks with the Archiator, I gather he detested and feared
The German nun.
Mother Pasqualina. He resented it when, apparently at her insistence, a Swiss gerontologist, Paul Niehans, was called from his practice in Montreux to the Vatican to treat the pontiff for complaints of advancing age.
Bruno Bartoloni also remembers this man, Paul Niehans.
Venne chiamato a un certo momento.
He was called at a certain point when Pius XII began to have hiccups. Peritoneal hiccups, I believe they're called. And they didn't know how to make them stop. Galeazzi-Lisi didn't exactly have great expertise, so Niehans was called in.
Non so se fu Berger a suggerirlo.
I don't know if it was Berger who suggested him, but he was a Swiss doctor, I think.
Un uomo con I capelli bianchi.
He was a man with white hair, quite elderly, very doctorly in appearance. It's not even very clear what he gave him, but in any case, the treatments were highly experimental.
Paul Niehans enters the scene, surrounded by an aura of legend. He is considered a genius.
Aloof and arrogant, a kind of de Gaulle of medicine.
That is how he will be described in an article by Paul Ferris in the New York Times, titled Fountain of Youth, Updated. Paul is the pioneering inventor of the so-called cell therapy, a pseudoscientific practice that Niehans believes capable of curing many ailments, from anemia to heart damage, from diabetes to blood pressure issues, even impotence.
He also claimed to develop underdeveloped bosoms and to relieve homosexual tendencies in men and women.
The cell therapy invented by Niehans consists in transferring living animal cells into an isotonic saline solution and then injecting them into a human being. It is based on the belief, never actually proven, that animal cells can regenerate the corresponding human tissues by affinity. Professor Niehans' theory has its roots in the ancient teaching of Paracelsus, cherished by homeopaths, according to which similia similibus curantar, that is, like cures like. And Niehans' personal legend begins well before he reaches the bedside of Pius XII, in an episode now shrouded in a mythic aura, which he himself helps to cultivate. Young Paul was not yet 40 when he was urgently summoned from a clinic in Lausanne. A clumsy surgeon, while removing a woman's thyroid, had accidentally taken out her parathyroid glands as well. This condemned her to a certain and unjust death. Paul injected the unfortunate woman with calf parathyroid cells. Just like that, without really knowing why. A hunch, let's say, and more importantly, an act of faith in that hunch. After all, even Jesus said, faith is what moves mountains. Quite unexpectedly, the patient survived, and Niehans gained immense prestige from it.
Niehans' real fame, however, rested on his treatment of those who were trying to overcome age. And the rumours of famous clients multiplied over the years, rarely confirmed, never denied. Winston Churchill, the Duke of Windsor, Konrad Adenauer, Thomas Mann, de Gaulle himself. It also gets a cinematic endorsement of sorts in Elizabeth Taylor's film Ash Wednesday, in which the middle-aged heroine gets her dosage of cells after a harrowing facelift.
Here he is, the new champion bursting onto the scene at the court of Pius XII. The de Gaulle of rejuvenating medicine, summoned by the formidable Sister Pascalina. Riccardo suddenly finds himself sharing space with a giant of pseudoscience. A man who could very well eclipse him for good in the favor of the beloved Eugenio Pacelli. But while the fragile calm within the Vatican walls teeters on the brink, the world outside strikes again, and this time, brutally. On April 11th, 1953, Holy Saturday, a 17-year-old boy discovers the lifeless body of Wilma Montesi on a beach near Rome. The woman is found without stockings, garter belt, or skirt. It immediately looks like the work of a maniac. It is the opening scene of one of the darkest and most unsettling crime stories in Italy's history. But what does any of this have to do with our Riccardo? How could the fate of an aspiring model, dead on an anonymous stretch of beach, possibly intersect with the destiny of our protagonist? Amid the whirlwind of tabloid headlines, Riccardo's name begins to surface in a world that has nothing to do with medicine. Is someone pulling the strings to frame him? Or has he himself lost the ability to see where duty ends and the hunger for attention begins, where the thirst for money slips into something darker, something like absolute evil? Two doctors are vying for control over an increasingly ailing pope. And outside, the body of a girl without stockings and without justice shakes all of Italy to its core. These stories are about to collide. And Riccardo is about to learn that some events are too vast, too dangerous to be tamed. Riccardo's life is a lit fuse. How long until it blows?
You've just listened to the 4th episode of Riccardo, The Man Who Blew Up the Pope, a podcast by Rob Ferraro, produced in association with Vittoria Ursi.